All right, we're on. Welcome to another Strengthlab podcast. First one
Plus
for
one.
2025.
2025. Yeah, beautiful.
Chrissy boy,
Back
back
again, back for
again.
some more. Yeah, it's been a little while, so keen to get things back up and running.
Same, yeah. Well, today we have a very, very special guest named Liam, who is an expert in all things blood work. So we're going to have a really cool conversation regarding health and blood work. And I think, Liam, I first met you when I first opened Strengthlab in the first location in Camberwell, and we were coaching both you and your brother, which is now 8 or 9 years ago, man.
Yeah,
Bro, that was a
it's been
long
a
time
been a
ago.
long time.
Crazy shit. And well, I opened that gym 8 or 9 years ago, that first location. Um, and back then you were always like very interested in health and fitness and all that stuff. Were you a trainer at that time?
I was a PT at that time,
You were
yeah,
a PT
but
and your brother was a
it
PT as
was
well.
you and Eric were like the first marketing I've ever seen who'd actually sounded like they knew what they were talking about.
Hmm.
And like people don't understand social media back in those days, it was so different.
Yeah, yeah, it was. And then basically from then you've really worked on, I guess, developing your own skill set and going, I guess, beyond the personal training realm and the sort of like the body composition realm to, yeah, improve your own knowledge so you can help other people, your own clients now, which is awesome. So why don't you just introduce yourself and yeah, we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. My name's Liam Murphy, guys, for those of you listening, former Strength Lab client, as you know, and I run a company called the Murphy Method. So I've got my own methods, and Andy's touched on it briefly of like my background of what I work in. So I work on, strength training programs, nutrition guides, certain supplemental protocols, and then go deep into blood work analysis as well.
Awesome, awesome. And I really like I find really interesting your story over the last specifically couple of years where things with your health haven't gone so well. And that's basically been your motivation for this whole thing, right?
Yeah.
Why don't you elaborate on that? Like just give us a bit of a background on what happened and yeah.
Yeah, so I've pinned a point now to it was an Epstein-Barr virus flare-up, which for people that don't know, it's a virus that we actually all have in our system, but our immune system, when it's healthy, keeps it at bay, keeps it in remission. So mine, I got to the point of physical, mental, emotional burnout, working non-stop throughout COVID, had about 60 clients. So taking on all that load, just kept working, living by myself, all that stuff. And it just got to a point where, yeah, my body just said no more. It just pretty much gave up. And then I went from there, going from like, this full-time health coach to someone who's unhealthy. And you're like, how the hell does that even happen? I've got all this knowledge and all this stuff, and I'm doing what I thought was all the right things. And then the more deeper I went, the more I realized I wasn't doing the right things. And now I know what I thought I knew back then. And then it just goes deeper and deeper there. So to try and explain it right, I had to navigate the medical system, which I found out, okay, turns out that's a bit of an absolute shit show here in Australia. Um, the amount of times I walked out of a doctor's office with a blood test or questions or anything and just feeling like I got no answers. And I kind of was made to feel stupid every time I walked out there. Like they'll be like, no, 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 you're all fine. This is all in your head, or XYZ, your numbers are all fine. But we all know intuitively, like if something's wrong with you, you know something's wrong. You know when something's not right. And you're just sort of scratching your head at that point. So that really just drive me to further go deeper and deeper into finding out stuff and working with certain mentors and stuff. And then I ended up finding out how many other people were going through similar things, a lot of unknown symptoms or a lot of unknown health issues. And I got to say, it's the most gratifying, rewarding thing now where I can just have a consult with someone and within like 15 to 20 minutes, I can clearly see what's going on with them and I know exactly how to fix them. And some of them cry because they've been trying to get help for so long. And they're like, I've been seeing XYZ family doctor for however long, and why did they never pick up on this marker or this marker or this marker? And, that's still a question I ask to this day as well.
I guess on the surface level, bro, like, was there anything within your blood markers that were out of range,
Oh
like
yeah.
in that point in time? And obviously we have these reference ranges for different markers for whatever, kidney function, liver function, whatever it is
Yeah.
that you're doing. Was there anything out of range? And then with the doctors, were they giving you that? I guess they were giving you a false sense of security, I suppose.
Yeah, so the main one was my CRP, my high sensitivity CRP, which people don't know, it's a marker for inflammation in the body. And for example, mine was at 30, which is
Oh,
ridiculously high.
really? It
And
should be under one, right?
it should be under one. And
Yeah.
mine was 30. So my
Wow.
body was chronically inflamed and they couldn't understand why. And I remember this doctor was just like, you've just got a problem with inflammation. And I'm like,
Oh,
That's super
okay.
helpful.
So I'm going on fasting protocols and ketogenic diets and carnivore and doing all this stuff to remove inflammation in my body, and it's still there. And I'm like, okay, well, this isn't changing or anything like that. But then there's also the misdiagnosis of blood tests that you can get. So a lot of people don't know to get an accurate blood test, you need to do it fasted in the morning. You need to have not actually trained in the gym or done anything strenuous about 48 to 72 hours beforehand, because that'll actually raise certain markers, especially your liver enzymes. And then at the same time, if you've been taking supplements, which will also mask certain either inflammation or certain markers, then you don't actually know what you're fixing because it's just masking a problem.
yeah, okay. And with your CRP being at 30, I know CRP can be quite a touchy marker, right? Like it can be
Mm.
quite acute. So like you
Yeah.
might get something over one and
Yeah.
then your next blood test might be back to normal, whatever.
Yeah.
Were you getting consistent like
Yeah,
high?
and to give you context from my other marker, my ESR was at 45, and that should be like below 10, in my opinion.
And so what was the like in terms of your experience with going to the doctors and stuff, like
Mm.
obviously this stuff is not just out of this is out of like medical ranges, like not even like therapeutic or
Oh yeah,
what a naturopath or someone looking for to optimize health. This stuff is like that's like way out.
yeah, way out. Which
So
just made me scratch my head of what I should be doing, and went down a lot of YouTube rabbit holes. And it wasn't until I started working with certain practitioners in certain fields that I ended up getting a lot better.
wow, okay. So let's rewind a little bit. Um, you said you were overworking because I thought you had a parasite or something. I wasn't sure.
Oh, I had that too.
Okay, yeah, that's why I want
I've
to,
got
I want to
a
go
I've got a
back and
long length.
I want to go into
Yeah.
detail of like what happened because I think it's really important. So you started feeling not so good. Run us through like what the symptoms were because I know you said your heart rate was going a bit crazy. I remember messaging
Yeah,
like,
so the day it all happened was I was doing a Stairmaster session, and I was just pushing myself as you do on a Stairmaster. I went for half an hour, and I just noticed like my heart rate was high and it got up to about 189. And I'm like, Jesus. So I ended up stopping. But I remember when I was stopping, like my heart rate just wouldn't come down. And then, of course, you're in a public place, your heart rate's in the 180s, and you're a little bit anxious of like, what is about to happen right now? And then I started getting all these random heart side effects and stuff. And I was having these random palpitation spasms like throughout the day. It was really sporadic and random. Got the ECG and all that. Got it scanned, blood tests, everything. Everyone says your heart markers are fine. Did a cardiologist test, put me on the treadmill, hooked me up, got my heart rate into the 190s. He said, you're fine. But intuitively, something's not right. Literally, just from walking up the stairs or even standing at the toilet taking a piss, you feel like your heart's about to explode. You're like, there's something not right about this.
yeah. So it was ongoing. Like after that day, you started noticing that something wasn't
Yeah,
right.
and it didn't go away after that.
Okay.
So my theory, at least, is that it awoke the Epstein-Barr virus that was in me, but I also had a bunch of other stuff pre-existing going on. Like I had a lot of stuff in my childhood, like gut issue wise. Like I had a severe Helicobacter pylori infection, which got misdiagnosed, and then I was on a hardcore dose of antibiotics, and then they ended up removing my appendix like surgically. So then that caused a lot of like scar tissue and stuff like that on the body, as I was also going into puberty, which then cascaded my hormones. So there was a lot going on.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And so how long were you sort of walking around with this sort of like heart sort of rhythm and speed issue?
4 months.
4 months.
Yeah,
In
took
that
4
time,
months.
kind of went to see a few people.
Yeah. The one thing that actually fixed it was an applied kinesiologist, funnily enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
So were you sort of constantly walking around with sort of tachycardia, or it would just sort of jump around a lot?
I would have no idea, to be honest. Like, I wouldn't even know how to describe it, because there's times where like you felt it pump hard, and then there's times you just felt it pump fast.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very hard to say. And because I was getting answers from, the scans and everything saying that you're fine, there was no label for it.
I mean, it could have even just been labeled as anxiety.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
with no real
that's
knowledge.
largely what it's probably diagnosed as for a lot of people, right?
Yeah. But intuitively, I would know it's not anxiety because I'm not an anxious person. But when your heart is, messed up, then you are anxious because something's clearly wrong. So, it's like, is it the chicken or the egg? Which one is it first? Was it the anxiety that caused the heart problem, or was it the heart problem that caused the anxiety? I thought it was the former.
Yeah, I believe
Yeah.
it. So what happened after that? So basically, you said you went to see a kinesiologist.
Yeah, got adjusted and saw them constantly. And then I started weight training again because I took like 4 months off weight training. It's the first time that that's ever happened in my life. We're talking like 10 years consistently lifting and then just had to stop. So I was just pretty much wasting away at that point. I've got some gnarly photos if you ever want to see them. But other than that, yeah, saw the applied kinesiologist and just pretty much saw specialists and got every test under the sun. One science was bioresonance that really helped. That detected the parasites, and turns out I had heavy metal poisoning as well, and a few other things going on there, which they got detoxed out of my body. But then it always got me wondering, as I started to get a lot better, I was like, why could no one, pick up on what happened? So then I started getting more bloods done, going to any GP, trying to get a list bulk build made up, whatever story. Oh, I'm just want to get this, and this tested to sort of play the system. And then I started working with a mentor. His name's Jake Dollarshell, and he was amazing with blood work and learned heaps about markers from him as well. And I know you worked with his associate, Dave. So yeah, and that just sort of skyrocketed everything from there. And then I just became obsessed.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And so is it all into like with the parasite and the Epstein, was this all intertwined, do you think? Or do you think it was more?
Yeah. I think honestly, it was like a lifelong accumulation of little things, and then it all just got up to a point. Because I do remember, like, from either childhood, late teenagehood, early 20s, there were always like some symptoms here and there, but nothing crazy to be like, oh, that's really noticeable. Maybe one day I had a flare up of whatever. And then, maybe you think you're just ill one time. But yeah, if I look back on it now, I'm like, oh, okay, I had a few symptoms going on.
Yeah, okay.
Was there like a single point that led up to like a cardiac event, or was it just more the accumulation over time and your heart rate was sort of jumping around, which sort of led you down that rabbit hole?
That cardiac event was that Stairmaster one. That was
Stairmaster.
really the one that just set it off. And honestly, it never felt the same since. But at the same time, I also accumulated up to like the stress of work, managing other emotions, clients, lockdowns. I was throughout Melbourne, the whole 2 years of lockdown, all that stuff, isolated by myself. So yeah, things can mess with you psychologically and then your physical health and all that stuff. So I think it was honestly an accumulation of shit, really.
Okay, cool. And what was like, what sort of interventions did you and Jake come up with to sort of get over this, and how long did it actually take?
Yeah. So it actually didn't take too long once I actually got the accurate diagnosis of what was going on. And that's the amazing thing that I harp back on. It's like once you know what's going on, you're sweet. It doesn't take too long to fix as long as you just make the changes and put the certain supplementational protocols. So two things. One was actually I got a genetic methylation test. Did all my DNA genes to see what's going on. Turns out I've got a bit of a bile fat malabsorption issue. So now I've got that fixed. So I don't have excess cholesterol in my bloodstream or anything like that. That could be messing up a lot of free forming bile acids.
You got a gallbladder?
Yeah, I've got a gallbladder. I don't have an appendix though. So I lost a lot of positive gram bacteria when I got rid of that appendix, which then accumulated in some things like some candida overgrowth and a few things like that, some fungal overgrowths that I had to get rid of. But they were pretty simple, just clean diet and a spore-based probiotic, and I was good to go.
And
I got very
improved, like started improving it.
Yep. For parasites, I took Parastrike by Herbs of Gold 3 times a day, and that got rid of the parasites. The parasites are a funny story because I actually found through the bioresonance therapy, I had them in my hamstrings and my fascia tissue, and I always had restless legs growing up, and I had no idea what it was. Would anyone pinpoint parasites? I would never think of that. But yeah, once they were killed and gone, yeah, it's night and day difference.
On the topic of parasites, I find that so interesting. Like, how does someone get a parasite?
Well, if anyone's been to Bali, which everyone in Australia has, there's probably a higher risk. Anyone who's been, had food poisoning once or twice in their life, you can get it from, alcohol as well, like just a bad drink or something.
Really?
You know, but mainly food source is the biggest one with parasites.
Water? Like if you have water overseas or something.
Water overseas, yes. I don't think it's not in the tap water here. That's probably another story we can go down with the tap water quality and all that stuff. I will say I did swap from tap to filtered water, and that made a big difference in my health and noticed the
Wow.
taste and difference there. But once I found out I had the heavy metal toxicity as well, so I had to get rid of them.
Shit. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, just food, potentially alcohol. Even what about like a sushi? Sometimes you hear like raw fish can potentially. I think the chances are quite low, but
I mean, it depends where it's sourced and where it's come from and how it's prepped and cooked and cleaned. Well, I guess raw isn't cooked, but yeah, I mean, there's also the risk of, mercury and certain heavy metals as well, like depending where that raw fish came from. Was it straight from the ocean or was it farm raised? Like, we don't know. It's hard to say.
and what about like heavy metal toxification? Like what where could someone like what sort of habits, daily habits could get you that? Like
Yeah, I would say the biggest one, a lot of people don't realize there's a lot of arsenic in packaged rice. So always washing your rice is a really good one. In terms of mercury, a lot of people eat like tinned tuna and a lot of like tinned stuff. So that's one that's, yeah, easy to axe. In terms of like lead and copper, so like there's like a lot of lead in certain chocolates you got to be wary of. Copper is one, and I've seen this one time and time again with clients that are very zinc deficient, because as we know, copper depletes your zinc and vice versa. So copper actually from our just pipes in our water. Everyone's drinking tap water all the time, and there's a lot of copper in the pipes, and so you're getting quite a lot of copper when drinking just tap water. It sounds real airy fairy and conspiracy and stuff, I know, but yeah, it's
it
honestly
makes
a real
sense,
thing.
right?
Yeah,
The pipes
it's
are fucking copper.
so it's until you have a health issue, then you start to pay attention to these things.
All you
But
really need to do
when
is just go outside, cut one of your pipes open, and see what's actually flowing through it,
yeah,
and you'll
Yeah.
actually probably be a bit disgusted.
even if you've got like a water filter or anything like that, and then you do the replacement after like 6 months or whatever, you have a look at that filter and you're like, holy shit,
I
it's
replaced
completely
mine.
brown and yeah,
I just replaced mine like a couple of months ago and I noticed that. I know I actually left it way too long as well because I completely forgot about it.
yeah, it's gnarly.
Pretty sight. Let me tell you. Do you drink tap water, Chris?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Oh, you do. You on it?
Bro, I'm from far north Queensland. Nothing gonna kill me.
I got one of those jugs.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I think so. All right. Awesome. Awesome. Let's I think we should dive into blood work and I guess common things you see and um yeah, just kind of all of that sort of stuff. So we touched on briefly like how to take an accurate blood test.
Yeah.
So we said fasted, no training. What
Yeah,
were the other?
fasted, no training, no supplements for about 48 to 72 hours. Make sure it's first thing in the morning. You can still drink water. It's worth mentioning for a lot of people, if you fast longer than 15 hours, it can affect your iron stores. There's a lot of women that are anemic and have blood loss from their periods and stuff. So iron's like a big thing that they start to measure. So that's one thing there as well.
Okay. And then in terms of like what to get tested, I know it can be a little bit hard just going to your GP and trying to
Oh,
get
yeah.
elaborate tests done because they don't sort of allow it a lot of the time. How do you kind of get around that?
So I've got a referral that I type up myself, and I'll send it to you guys if you want, so you can just change the name and use it for your clients. Because honestly, it's just like if a doctor just handed, oh, sorry, if the client just handed the doctor a note saying, "Can I get this tested?" They'll be like, no, you don't need this X, Y, Z. But if it says like, hey, it's Liam Murphy here, I'm this XYZ coach and my client is going under these services, I'd like to just get this amount tested so I can see what's going on, so he can get my professional review and all that stuff. And then you add your contact details, and if you just ask nicely, a lot of them are good. I have had some that are unfortunately like a little bit arrogant, and they've gone like, this guy doesn't need XYZ, and they've honestly admitted to the client that they actually don't know what some of those markers mean, which is a little bit concerning. Then there's some, unfortunately for us males, if you want your hormones tested, a lot of doctors are very hesitant to bulk bill them. So we're talking like your test, your SHBG, your estradiol, your free test, all that stuff. Even certain thyroid ones like your T4 and T3, a lot of them don't like to test thyroid unless your TSH, your thyroid stimulating hormone, is out of whack. So they'll only do the one test and then they'll be like, okay, well, if you're messed up, then we'll investigate a little bit further.
I've had that.
Man, honestly, I've had better experiences. I know that obviously you keep talking about bulk build and this and that, but look, I've had better experiences personally going to a like private practice.
Yeah.
I think that it's a much, much better way to go. They seem to be more receptive. Obviously, you're paying for, to go there, but I definitely think it's worth it because in my experience as a whole, they tend to listen more. And they, even for some of my clients, when requesting blood work, they won't really have an issue with it. And sometimes they'll even email me. So might just be better for some people to go and see someone in private practice, as opposed to, just bulk billing everything as well. Even if you do have to pay for some of those markers, I think it's definitely worth it.
I think,
I agree. Like 100% it's worth it.
Yeah, dude, it's like how
you go to GP, man, it's all general. You know what I mean? Like they don't want to be there really. They're just in and out, next patient, boom, boom, boom.
The only reason I mentioned bulk bills is because there's no barrier to entry for someone to get them done. Like if someone's paying for your services and then on top you want them to get a test that could cost like $170, then they'll be like, nah, I'm out. But bulk bill, luckily here in Australia, we all have Medicare and, you can usually get it done. That's the only reason I mention it. But I do really agree. Private is a lot better.
I usually just order mine online.
Yeah. Or you can skip it all together.
iMedical.
Or even you can actually get your bloods now off instant scripts as well. I've had a few clients doing that too.
Oh, really?
You have to pay extra for certain markers, but yeah, it's quite cheap.
Shit.
Interesting. Does it charge per marker or does it have certain packages?
It's like packages, but then you pay for the add-ons.
Yeah, gotcha.
So yeah, you still have to pay, but it's not quite as expensive as iMedical.
Yeah, okay.
But heading in the right direction, it's good that a lot of these like instant scripts companies like that, like you can go down that pathway without having to actually going to see like a GP.
If you go see a GP and you just say like, say they say, okay, we don't want to do T3, we don't want to do like all these, elaborate thyroid markers and hormone markers and shit like that. Are you able to just say, look, I'm happy to pay for them and then they'll do it or not?
They'll write a different script and then you have to hand that script to the pathology and then they will charge you. But in my experience, it's a ridiculous amount compared to iMedical. For hormones and a few things I wanted tested one time in Brisbane, the nurse had no idea what to do because I had two different scripts. One was bulk build and one was hormones and all that stuff. And she ended up like calling a manager or whatever, and she ended up saying it was going to be like $430, which is almost 3 times the price of an iMedical script.
Yeah, okay.
So it's a bit risky
at that point. Yeah.
The thing is, like, I don't want to kind of like hack on doctors too much or anything like that because they do a lot of things really well, and obviously, I don't want to kind of like speak badly about them, but yeah, when it comes to this sort of stuff, it is just hard. It is just quite hard to get an in-depth analysis of your health.
Yeah.
And have it analyzed by someone that can go in depth with the actual analysis of the blood work, because a lot of the time a doctor's just kind of perusing it for general stuff. Even in your situation, like, oh no, you're fine, like everything's good, blah blah blah. And I think sometimes if you're not feeling good or whatever, it is good to kind of get a second opinion from someone that understands.
But how often have you ever been to a GP? And look, this is not ragging on GPs, but I've been literally sitting in the chair. You look across and they're looking at stuff and they bring up Google and they're starting Googling it like while they're sitting there.
All your symptoms.
So, like, I mean, which is fine, like, but at the same time, it's like I'd rather them just be open and honest and say, like, "Oh, I actually don't know that much about this. Let's have a bit of a look, and I'll go a bit of a deep dive." But often, like you said before, there can be a little bit of arrogance to some of the tone and the way that they do speak to a lot of the, patients that do come in.
Yeah, but look, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. I've got one client who they were kind of refusing to release his blood work, but I really wanted to see it, and he requested it from him. So they actually added me to the TCA, which was the team care arrangement. So they're like, we're actually just going to add you to this if you just sign this waiver. I'm like, sweet, because he was on a whole bunch of stuff. He was on the Ozempic and blood work and all that stuff. 150-kilo truck driver getting his life together. So I'm like, I just want to see what's going on. And, I'm here to help. He's hired me as a coach and, working synergistically with him. I'm like, this is a dream come true. Like, there's no barrier to entry. We're all here purely just to help the client. That's it. There's no money involved or anything like that. There's no commissions or whatever. It's like, we just want to see what's going on and we're all here to help him. And it was one of the best experiences I've had with a team care arrangement doctor.
Yeah, you don't get that often.
Not often, though. I speak a lot for the people that I only speak for myself and all the clients that I deal with, but navigating the medical system can be just very fussy and very hard because it's like when someone's suffering, they only care about getting better. And they just feel like they're going around in circles, getting sent to each different specialist and with no answers.
Very frustrating. I do kind of like, I put myself in the shoes of a GP because Emma's mum is a GP, and she's like, when I've spoken to her in the past, she just says, you have no idea how many people just come in and have just Googled things and have no idea what they're talking about, and they just try to like argue with the GP that they think they know what they're talking about. So it's like then Chris comes in or you come in who actually does know what they're talking about, and they're arrogant to you because they've got someone literally sitting across them trying to tell them how to do their job every time someone comes in, and 95% of them have no idea what they're talking about. So it's like,
Yeah.
it becomes, quite frustrating for them as well. And they want to get to all this stuff, and they may have just read some blog or whatever, but they've just really got no idea what they're talking about. So you got to put yourself in their shoes, and sometimes, yeah, it is hard to get across to them because they literally hear this shit every single day, and it's hard for them to distinguish between someone who knows what's up and is just like has no idea. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. All right, sick. So someone has satisfied all the criteria to get the test. They've worked out where to get it. They've got all their markers done and everything. Maybe let's talk about like, what are the biggest sort of issues that you see across the board with blood work with your own clients?
The main ones I see, honestly, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is a pattern that I see all the time. There's actually data out there now that 38% of the population has it, which is pretty crazy. And, why would anyone think that they've got non-alcoholic fatty liver disease? Because it's literally called non-alcoholic. Like everyone thinks of just alcohol in the liver. I don't drink. Why is my, liver damaged? It's like, well, there's methylation issues, there's metabolic issues, there's visceral fat, which is the fat around the organs and especially around the liver. But the beautiful thing is the liver is the one organ that can regenerate itself. So it's pretty quick and easy to fix.
So what markers would be out in someone that has non-alcoholic fatty liver?
Yeah, it would be their ALT, their ASP, GGT, and there are a few other ones if you look into like cholesterol and white blood cells as well, but we don't need to get into those specific ones because it's a little bit more for advanced cases.
They would be elevated.
Yes, but this is why I always go back to the accuracy of the blood test, because anyone can just do a really heavy weight session and then the next day get their bloods done and they think their liver enzymes are through the roof. It's like, no. It's just natural inflammation that's going on there.
Yeah. I get you.
What sort of, how high above the reference range would you be looking at to sort of classify someone with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease?
Again, this isn't medical advice. This is my personal opinion.
Just general, obviously,
general, yeah.
completely educational in nature, but maybe above a certain number, I guess, would you?
Yeah. Well, I usually actually look for three specific markers. I don't actually ever diagnose with just the one marker because there are certain times where like just one ALT can be very high, and then ASP and GGT and bilirubin, all these other things could be functioning just fine. So then you have to do a little bit more investigating of why that is. But usually I would see about 20 above the reference range.
Sorry, I missed that. Did you say 25?
20.
20.
And I'm not talking about the general reference range here. I've got my own sort of optimal reference ranges that I use because for people that don't know, the general reference range for whatever lab you take it to is just an accumulation of data from like 18 to 65-year-olds of where that should be within like a health range.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you being in a normal range doesn't necessarily mean that you're healthy.
This is why I've had so many people say to me, why didn't my doctor pick up on this? Well, because there's nothing flagging. Like, you know, when you look at a blood test and you see something's red because it's either outside of the reference range and the computer automatically flags it. There's a lot of times there's markers that are high or a bit out of whack, but because it's still within their reference range, it doesn't get flagged at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And what are some other things that you see?
In terms of other than fatty liver disease.
Yeah.
Cholesterol seems to be a main one. There's inflammation as well. A lot of immune and thyroid issues as well. Hashimoto's is a big one with thyroid issues and white blood cell count. But a lot of white blood cell stuff also correlates to a lot of inflammation as well. Immune system reactions, then that correlates back to the thyroid. So it does go in circles, but then there's another one which is a complete mystery for a lot of people, and that's iron. Iron absorption is a big one. I mean, yes, I do also go into the hormonal stuff that I see if the client does get that tested. And there's a lot of things that we can do there. Like I have a client who, yeah, low testosterone, doesn't know why, but turns out he's got sleep apnea. He may have varicocele vein. Like there's a few things going on there.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. With testosterone, so I think what is it? It's like 300 to 900, something like that is like the reference range.
For free?
Is that for total or free? I can't remember. I
This
think
should be for free. Yeah.
free, yeah.
Yeah. Total goes up to about like 35, 30, depending on the test.
Okay. So what do you
Yeah.
think is optimal, or is it different for everyone based
It's
on?
different. It's definitely different for everyone. I think it depends on the age as well, how much lean muscle mass you've got on yourself. But if we're going to talk, say, like a 25 to 30-year-old healthy male, I would at least like to see it in the late 20s and the free test to be around the 4 to 500. SHBG is a big marker worth noting as well, because for people that don't know, SHBG is your sex hormone binding globulin. And what that does is that binds up the free testosterone in your nutsack that gets distributed throughout your body. So you could have high testosterone, but you could also have high SHBG, which means your body isn't using that bioavailable testosterone. And then if there's too much and you've got too much estradiol, then it aromatizes and accumulates into estradiol, which estrogen's not necessarily bad, but as a male, you don't want that out of whack.
Yeah. And what are some of the things that could potentially push up SHGB?
Well, I hate to say it, but genetics is a big factor. I myself, like through a DNA test, I've got 2+ positive copy genes of SHBG and estrogen. So I got life on hard mode as a male, I feel like. But you know, a lot of people, it honestly comes down to lifestyle. There's multiple things that can increase it. There's no one specific thing that could be like, oh, you eat this and you know it decreases or increases your SHBG. I mean, there's certain supplements like Tonkat Ali, which is specific for getting down in SHBG. But I would honestly say lifestyle is the biggest one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Would you say there's any other potential epigenetic factors that may be playing into the SHBG being super high as well?
Oh yeah.
Other than lifestyle, or would there be other things? I guess not resistance training for one. That's again under the umbrella of lifestyle, I suppose.
Yeah.
Stress as well, I guess.
I've never seen a correlation from stress to SHBG, but then stress obviously accumulates to a whole bunch of other hormones, which could correlate to SHBG. So, yeah, I
It's like a
mean,
web, huh?
it is, and that's why it's so hard as a practitioner. Like, yeah, there's no like blood work course or university degree or anything you can do specifically on blood work. The more you learn about it, the more you learn through practitioners and mentors, and you see the patterns go on and what correlates to what. Like I'm still learning new stuff every single day. I honestly don't claim to be an expert. I can help people, but it's like I've got people I look up to and I'm like, holy shit, I can't wait to get to that level, because it's honestly just a map and a puzzle that you sort of got, it's in front of you. You got to interpret a path to whatever it's going to be.
Yeah, I remember when I worked with Dave, yeah, there was just like he would always like show me all these correlations, man, and it was just like fucking 5 to 10 different things like correlating to each other. It's like this is high, this is low, and this is low, and this is high.
Yep.
Like this is, most likely this particular issue. So it's not just like about a single marker, a lot of the times it's
Yep.
everything is intertwined.
It's never about a single marker, and that's where the general population, the doctor will be like, oh, your cholesterol's a bit high, just keep an eye on that, and they could just panic from there, when turns out your cholesterol's free radical and roaming through your system because maybe you have a fat malabsorption issue. So you've got free forming biles. You just need to take maybe a binder or take some Tadka to help get the biles flowing, the synergistic relationship between the gallbladder and the liver, flush it out. You do a blood test the next day. Hey, my cholesterol's really good.
And so you did mention cholesterol before being one thing that you see, or lipids
Yeah.
in general
Yeah.
being out. Is that the main cause that you see, or is it like diet related?
I see the main cause of concern for a lot of people, especially around LDL and cardiovascular health. Again, it's a really easy supplemental fix, but then it's also a lifestyle fix. And I hate to come back to it, but cholesterol is also a genetic factor. You could have high cholesterol in the family. You could be like me and have a fat malabsorption issue. But yeah, it's easily preventable.
And do you think like, because there's all these different, obviously, nutrition strategies. You go
Mhm.
on Instagram, you're seeing carnivore, you're seeing all of these sort of like meat only diets and things like that. Do you think this sort of thing contributes to bad lipids?
I'll say yes, but I'll also say no at the same time. I say yes for a certain person that doesn't know what they're doing. Like, say, someone just looks up a carnivore diet and starts eating a shit ton of saturated fat and, steaks and stuff. Then, yes, I've seen issues with cholesterol. And I've seen the opposite. I've seen someone, work with a coach, go on like a ketogenic or a carnivore diet and do the clean version, not like a dirty version, actually monitor their fat intake, tracking, and actually lose some body weight in the process. And I've
Yeah,
actually
that's what I
seen
was
it
gonna
get better. So yeah,
say. If like obesity is one of the factors and that diet leads to you being not obese anymore, then you
yeah.
could maybe see an improvement from that,
I
right?
I like to say it always comes back to lifestyle. Everyone looks for the quick fix, the quick diet, all this, but it's lifestyle. It's literally just eat whole healthy foods, get good sleep, good nutrition, good hydration, and train with weights and do some walking as well. And keep your stress to a minimum if you can.
Okay. Awesome.
Honestly, it's an easy fix for a lot of blood work problems.
Sick, sick, sick. And with like all of these common things that you see pop up with clients, I want to kind of shift gears into like supplementation.
Yep.
And I want to know like what are your like foundational supplements that you would pretty much, maybe not to everyone, but to most people recommend?
Just most people, or with blood work interpreted, because there's a few different ones there. Like general population, I can tell you a good form of zinc, definitely, because as we mentioned before about the copper and the pipes and stuff, I see a lot of people deficient in zinc.
Yeah.
Us being here in Melbourne, maybe not so much for you, Chris, but a vitamin D supplement. Yeah, we literally go through 6, 7 months from like May to November where we don't see the sun down here. So I mean, a vitamin DK2 ratio supplement with 100 micrograms per 1,000 IUs is really good. There's one that it's by like Dr. Eric Berg on Amazon, and it's got like the IU ratio there, and you can just take 5,000 IUs and that covers you. Just so it obviously helps with plaquing issues as well, so you don't form any plaque in the arteries. That's one risk that people think with vitamin D. But it's so good for the immune system as well. And then the last one I'd say would be magnesium glycinate. Those three would just cover all bases.
And are you in terms of zinc? You like a picolinate, or do you like something else?
It depends on the client, right? Picolinate, like 50 milligrams a day, seems to be like a really easy staple. Some people it's 15, some people it's 30. For a lot of my clients that have autoimmune and gut issues, zinc L-carnosine is really good,
Yeah.
like for healing the gut. So I've found that one. I've used it myself. I've used it with clients who have Crohn's disease and stuff like that. Zinc L-carnosine, if you think you've got digestive issues, that's a really good one. But for anyone listening to this who's just going to go buy some zinc now, please do not take it on an empty stomach. Have it with food. You will feel nauseous if you take it on an empty stomach.
Okay, so it's more like issue and symptom dependent, and different, I guess, zincs will go, will
Yeah.
help different areas.
That was just the general baseline. I'll give you the blood work ones. And, for those markers that we mentioned before, I'll give you what I would do. Again, this isn't medical advice. This is what I would personally do. But liver enzymes, I would use N-acetylcysteine, or I'd use TUDCA. I would more go favor to TUDCA because it works with bile flow. So it's got more of a synergistic relationship with the gallbladder and the liver. So for also LDL cholesterol and just in general inflammation markers, I'd use red yeast rice, and then I would also use cod liver oil. They seem to be amazing for it. Red yeast rice for the LDL, and then cod liver oil for not only the rest of your lipid panel, but for inflammation as well. Certain people I use curcumin. That's really good. For people that don't know, curcumin's just the potent form of turmeric. It's the antioxidant that's found in it. That's really good, not only for a lot of clients that have gut issues and inflammation going on in the gut, but just blood flow in general. And then lastly, clients with iron issues, I personally never get them to take an iron supplement. For people that know, certain practitioners that know, like there's a saying that we have, and it was Dave that actually taught me this, Andy, but iron is like chocolate cake for pathogens if you've got negative gram-bacteria
Yeah, I remember
overgrowth or anything like that. So, you could be low in iron. And I had a lady 2 nights ago went through her blood work, and she's like, I'm just so tired all the time. And she had this history of a appendix removed and gut issues and all this stuff. And she was taking 100 milligrams of this iron supplement. And what I would do in that case is I would actually either take lactoferrin, or the best one is a desiccated spleen supplement. That
Really?
really helps with iron absorption.
Okay, interesting. I always remember Dave. Yeah, he would always recommend the cod liver oil over like your regular fish oil.
Yeah.
Uh, for vitamin A. It's got more vitamin A.
It does. It's got vitamin D in it as well. In my opinion, there's also less risk of toxicity. There has been shown to be
From
like,
rancid.
yeah, rancid fish oil toxicity, certain temperatures, the way it's manufactured, all that stuff. Whereas cod liver oil seems to be at least more from like a wild source. So, and yeah, I just believe it is a bit more bioavailable.
And are you like a Nordic naturals person, or is there a brand that you recommend when it comes to like
Oh,
cod liver fish oil?
so many. Look, I just use a Now Foods cod liver oil. Now Foods is just an easy barrier to entry. I use so many brands, man, like Thorn, all that stuff. Level Up Health, they're really good. Bioceuticals, got them spitballing here. Now Foods is a good one.
Yeah.
Trying to think of any off the top of my list.
Yeah. Okay. I want to circle back to vitamin D. So I've got some notes here that I've been kind of scribbling down.
Yeah,
So
go for it.
vitamin D is another one of these like ranges that is just so fucking wide, right?
Yep.
I think like the medical range is like 30 to 150 or something like that.
Yep.
And what do you think about that? Like obviously that's quite low for optimal health. Would you say that?
If it's in the lowest range, I've
Someone's
seen
like
people.
40 or something,
Oh
30?
yeah, definitely. Like if someone's above 100, you're generally clear.
Yeah.
Even like 80s, 90s, you're generally okay. But yeah, I like to see it above the hundreds.
Yeah. It's just crazy that that's like, you know,
But then we also got to look at absorption, right? So vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin. Some people are taking vitamin D tablets and not eating it with a fat meal containing fat. So then they're not absorbing it properly. And then we have vitamin D receptors in our cells all over our body. So like then there's immune issues going on. Like vitamin D is a powerhouse. But for people that don't know, if you just go out in the sun for like 20 to 40 minutes, as long as you don't get burnt, you're getting like 20 to 40,000 IUs just straight
really?
away. Yeah.
Like that's a big hit, eh?
Yeah, it's a huge hit.
It's crazy. I didn't realize it was that much.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. So that's like I mean, and then that's only a reasonably short period of time as well. Like it's not.
Yeah, 40 minutes,
You're out there all
20,000
day.
IUs. Like if you go out for a walk now, for example, it's 350. You could probably go out for a half an hour walk with your shirt off, not get burnt. And yeah, you'll get probably in that half an hour about 20,000 IUs.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy. Magnesium. This is, I think, a big one.
Yeah.
So you said you recommended magnesium glycinate
Generally. So
generally.
there are different forms I use for different clients. Like my, business entrepreneur clients, I use magnesium L-threonate to calm their brain down, hone in a bit of focus.
Yep.
For digestive health clients that have a bit of issues, especially around like constipation stuff, I use magnesium citrate, loosens the stools, calms the guts a little bit. But only clients with those issues, because someone just out of the blue starts taking magnesium citrate, they can start having loose stools and start losing a few electrolytes. So we don't want that.
And I, I hear some sort of like differing, I guess, opinions on magnesium dosages.
Mm-hmm.
Some go for like the 10 milligram per kilogram sort of
Yep.
area. What do you think is like a good amount to supplement?
General weight training, general person.
General person that is weight training and
General person that's weight training. Look, the 10 milligrams per kilo is safe, but I don't think you also need that much. I'm sorry, I think the actual question is 100 milligrams per 10 kilos or something. Maybe I think it's the exact same thing. But
Yep.
for example, like I'm 70 kilos. I don't need 700 milligrams of magnesium every day. I take 500, and yeah, I'm doing just fine. And I take one in the morning and I take one after my training session.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm about the same, like 400 or 500 a day. Do you
Yeah,
take Chris?
Yeah, I'm probably pushed up closer to 1,000.
Yeah, okay, so a bit more. And you notice any digestive issues, diarrhea, or anything like that?
Nah, nothing like that. No.
what type are you taking, Chris?
So I use the Ethical Nutrients Mega Mag. So it's a combination
That's a
formula, I
combination.
believe.
Yeah.
Maybe like 700 chelated, I believe.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think it's
Okay.
mostly glycinate though, and stuff.
Yeah, it is mostly glycinate. Yeah, I believe.
Yeah.
Shit, yeah.
All right.
That's good stuff.
I want to get into some interesting stuff now. I want to talk about uh, elevating mental, physical performance. So, nootropics, any sort of supplements you can use to enhance brain function, anything like that. What do you recommend?
Yes, there's two. Yes, this is a supplement, like just an easy one's caffeine.
Yeah, that's a boring one.
Yeah,
That's
it's
bad.
just so easy. Like black coffee has so many health and antioxidants benefits, 0 calories, appetite suppressing, like yeah, and there's research out there that shows just you can have about 4 cups a day and you're completely fine and you're getting a lot of these
So
benefits
how many milligrams is that? Like,
of caffeine.
yeah,
Depends on the cup, because some of them measure a cup as like 110 milligrams, some of them measure it as a shot, so it's like 80 milligrams. So roughly almost 400 milligrams of caffeine, I would say. But I would also say start a caution and build up to it.
yeah, of course, of course. Don't
Yeah.
go fucking some freaky pre-workout.
Well, look, caffeine also goes down to genetics. I hate to come back to it, but our genetic receptors of how quickly we detoxify caffeine, our adenosine receptors, and all that stuff. So some people, the half-life lasts longer. Some people, they get that instant hit and then it dies off after 20 minutes and they get a crash. So everyone's different.
Yeah, yeah. Chris, what's your caffeine intake like?
So on rest days, I look, the range typically is like that 4 to 6 milligram per kilogram sort of range, but I would say I probably sit between, yeah, around 400 to 600 most days. Typically on like a lower stress day that's not like a training day, I probably opt closer to that 400 milligrams. I guess the interesting thing that I tend to do a lot of as well is as I go through like, periods of the structuring of your mesocycles of training, etc., you tend to see caffeine sort of creep up a little bit, as you get into those later weeks of training. But then during a deload, I tend to cut it in half. Um, I think if you cut it out completely, obviously you do get some withdrawals, but I tend to just cut it in half pretty much from there. So maybe around 200 on those weeks, but most of the time probably between that 4 to 600 milligram range. But I'm sort of someone who gets a lot of positive effects from it, but I don't get any of the negative, anxiety, heart palpitations, any of those sort of side effects, unless I sort of go over that 800 milligram sort of range, which I never really do. I don't really like being overly stim. So even for me at like, my off-season body weight would be like 107, 108 kilos. 4 to 6 milligram per kilogram for me is more than enough.
Do you have a cutoff period for your caffeine?
Yeah, so I try and have an absolute cutoff at around probably 2 p.m.
Solid.
And if it's any sort of later than that for me, I don't really have any problems with sleeping, but I have had clients that they can't even take it past 12 p.m. So obviously the half-life is still relatively long for that drug to remain in your system. So for me, it's 2 p.m. For some clients, it's like they can only have pre-workout in the morning or caffeine in the morning. Anything sort of even past maybe 10 a.m. for them, they do struggle with, sleeping issues around that as well. Some can't use it at all. So it is going to be one of those things, like you said, that's very individualized. But for myself, 2 p.m., any later than that, and I start to become a little bit more sleeping a little bit restless and find it more difficult to sort of get into REM sleep.
Is all yours coming from coffee, or is it like pre-workouts or anything like that as well?
Yeah, so generally I'll do a combination. So I will do double espresso shots, which, like I said, are generally around sort of that 80 to 120 milligram range. So I'll generally have one of those in the morning. On training days, I'll have only ever have one scoop of pre-workout. So that's generally around that sort of 200 to 250 milligrams of caffeine. And on those days, I'll literally just have I'll have coffee and pre-workout. Just that's it. On rest days, I might have 3 cups of coffee. So it's probably still around about the equivalent of what I would have, but slightly less.
Liam, maybe if you do know this, like elaborate on why you asked that question in terms of like where the caffeine's coming from. What changes? Does anything change?
Well, yeah, there is. I mean, like for example, if it's a pre-workout, obviously it's not just caffeine, there's other ingredients in there. So someone who just takes pre-workouts, the side effects they got from beta alanine making them feel tingly and shit, they could think it's caffeine when it's not the case. So
Paresthesia.
just a general question. But also I was interested to see because there are a lot of people that they find when they get above like the 2 to 300, once they start getting there, they notice they have to be sensitive with their time of day of when they're taking it. Otherwise, yeah, sleep seems to suffer for some people. My rule of thumb is just, 12:30 around there, just cut it completely. But yeah, everyone's different. I know some people that can take a shot of coffee after dinner and fall asleep
Man,
like
I've
a
got
baby.
some like Italian, my wife's like some of their Italian families, like
There you
they're
go.
doing a shot
Yeah.
after dinner. Boom, boom, boom. Like it's nothing for them. I think as well, habitual consumption plays a significant role. So, you can get sort of more desensitized to it over time with higher doses that you do take of it as well. So for them in Italy, it's very, very normal for them to just boom after every meal, shot. No issues sleeping, nothing.
Been
Yeah.
doing it since they were
My
kids.
dad, my dad does about 15 espressos a day.
Holy shit.
Yeah, and
Which sounds crazy to us, but for him, it's just like
have them at
it's
night.
like normal. You know what
I
I
had
mean?
one
It's
the
like
other
that
day,
habitual
the
consumption.
other night with
Yeah.
him after dinner. I was like, "Oh no, I can't." He's like, "Oh, come on, have one." I was like, "All right."
Meanwhile, you're just laying awake all night. Like,
But you know
oh,
what? I was actually fine. I didn't notice
yeah.
any difference at all. I find like for me personally with caffeine, it really depends on the state of mind I'm in. If I'm very stressed and very anxious, then my tolerance is just next to nothing.
Yeah, you're just adding fuel
When
to
I'm
the fire.
relaxed, if I'm on holidays, say, or I'm just, in a relaxed sort of environment and I feel really good, I can increase my caffeine exponentially and not feel any side effects at all and only sort of like benefits. So it's just really for me depends on like what sort of like my day, week sort of is looking like and where sort of my head's at that stage.
The psychological aspect's really interesting because it's like if you have that coffee at nighttime, instead of enjoying it, you start stressing and thinking, fuck, I can't sleep. And you create that anxiety when you're lying there. Second, you go to bed and you're tossing and turning, you're like, yeah, it's because of the
It's the
coffee, all
coffee.
this stuff. But if you just enjoyed it and didn't think anything of it, like how many people do you know that go out on a night out and have espresso martinis and stuff and then just pass out? And I'm like,
Red Bull
Or
vodka.
the
complete
old
opposite
vodka
for me.
Red Bull combo.
Yeah.
From years ago.
Yeah. And the thing is with that, yeah, when I had it, I literally I completely forgot about it until today, just saying that. So I must have just gone home and not even remembered I had it, and just had a normal night's sleep. All right, so caffeine's one. Well, what else is on the list there?
I've actually seen a lot of benefits from methylene blue, which is like a blue textile dye that transports certain electrons and oxygen and blood flow and stuff. And man, I've seen huge benefits from taking that. Just microdosing it, I'm only taking 1 milligram per day. A lot of business entrepreneurs I know build up to like 5 to 10 milligrams daily. It is an antimicrobial, so I give a word of caution because I found if I had it on an empty stomach, I felt a little bit ugh. But then if I had it after food, I was fine.
You ever heard of that, Chris?
Yeah, I have. Just a word of caution if you're using ADHD medication.
Not just ADHD, but yeah, any
Other medications as
SSRIs
well.
and yeah,
Yeah.
probably yeah, word of
I've never
caution.
heard of it.
Yeah, it's sort of like coming in now in terms of its ability to assist with sort of mitochondrial function, mitochondrial efficiency, and those sorts of things. There's a few compounds that are sort of coming out, and methylene blue seems to be one of those that's very effective.
So it helps with energy production, essentially, from like a mitochondrial standpoint.
Yeah, energy production,
Yeah.
cell turnover, all those types of things. Yeah.
But it does need to be pharma grade for a lot of people out
Yes,
there that are
that's
now
a
going to
very
go,
good point.
yeah,
If you're just buying it off a random lab, we
yeah,
were just talking about heavy metals before. So the
Yeah.
quality controlling of it at this point in time is not great. So just be very careful with where you're sourcing it from.
Interesting. Okay. Have you tried it, Chris?
I haven't tried it yet, no, but a couple of my clients have got it and they've had some positive experiences with it thus far as well.
Really? So it can interact with different medications and stuff. So
Yes.
It can work with like certain serotonin receptors in your gut, and as I mentioned before, it's antimicrobial as well. So yeah, always a word of caution.
okay. Cool. And anything else?
There's one that I don't personally use, but I've had a lot of clients have benefits from it. Well, it's actually two. It's cordyceps mushrooms, like the extract of that, a tincture, and then the other one would be L-theanine.
Yeah, L-theanine. We see it like L-theanine in a lot of like caffeinated formulas and stuff, right?
Yeah,
Doing a lot of
It seem-
pre-workouts and stuff as
yeah,
well.
it seems to just enhance that like focus. It's like the opposite to caffeine. It's like it amps you up, but then the L-theanine brings you back down to like a real steady level,
It's like a calm focus.
pretty much.
Okay. So you don't get the like as jittery and stuff, right?
Not to my experience or to the experience of others, but hey, some person could just be some genetic responder and just freak out on it. I don't know.
Literally got a bottle of it right here.
There we go. How many milligrams do you take, Chris?
Yeah, these are 200. So I usually just
yeah.
whenever I feel like I need it, I'll just pop a 200 and go from there. But I don't. It's not something I take like every day. If I'm feeling exceptionally sort of anxious or maybe a bit overstimulated, then that's something I'll use.
Is there anything else we want to cover? I got some questions here.
Is this the
Liam?
Q&A?
Yeah.
No, we can go. I feel like we've covered a lot. Don't need to spit out any more information to wrap around people's heads.
Beautiful. All right, so I've got some questions. We'll do some Q&A. Question number one. What is the best way to calculate macros for a refeed? Maybe Chris, this might be your domain.
Yeah. So obviously, I think when you are refeeding, I think what we're really trying to do here is bring your caloric intake. I'm assuming you're in a deficit because you should be if you're looking to refeed. So you either want to be back at maintenance or slightly above maintenance. Essentially, that refeed macros, I think a very good rule of thumb would be just the re-addition of 125 to maybe even up to 200 grams of carbohydrates. Again, your ability to metabolize carbohydrates is going to be very different depending on the person, the amount of insulin sensitivity that that person has got. But that seems to be a pretty good range. And I think that, look, you can do a single day of like super high. But in saying that as well, you probably don't want to bite away too much from the total weekly deficit macros that you're trying to create. So I'm much more preferential to doing sort of double day refeeds to get sort of a maximum wash off of fatigue. So I think a lot of people think that, I'll often have a client who I might give a couple of refeeds and their weight goes down in the days following. And they're like, oh, this is magic. It's because I ate all this extra food. But The reality is you've just washed off a bunch of fatigue and, cortisol and stuff and sort of actualized the progress that you've made. So I think anywhere from sort of, you can use your sort of off season or gaining phase macros as a little bit of a guide. Maybe you got your carbohydrates up to, I don't know, 500 grams during your last push up, right? Now, obviously, during this next phase, you might be on half of that. Say you're dieting on 250 grams of carbs. You could still have 1 or 2 days back at, say, 450, 500 grams of carbs. So I think more or less you just want to assess what the response is from that refeed. So, how much did your body weight go up in the days following, and then how long did it take to sort of come back down? But generally, for most people, 125 to sort of 200 grams of carbs is going to be a pretty good range. Would you agree with that?
Liam, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, I got a few things to add, but it's kind of diverges from the question. So it's more so like if it's to minimize the damage of the refeed. So if you're not used to eating, a 200-gram carb sitting in one meal, you can pop 500 milligrams of berberine about half an hour before. And as Chris mentioned before, if the person's insulin resistant or not, we don't really know if he's insulin sensitive, but that'll just help really with just as less damage as possible.
We should have covered berberine because that's a very, very good supplement as well.
We can cover it now.
We can. I'm cautious always of berberine because it is an antimicrobial. I've had, the most amazing results with clients on berberine, and then I've had some that it's like, okay, potent antimicrobial, they either get constipated, digestion issues, gut pain, a few things there. So always a side of caution with it. But in terms of the potent herb for insulin sensitivity, if I'm ever going to go off meal plan, for example, I've just got a Thorn bottle upstairs waiting for me, and I just pop 2 capsules beforehand. As like an insurance policy.
Yeah. Do you use it, Chris?
I use berberine, when my off-season caloric intake and carbohydrates get really high, sort of above that 500 range, 600, whatever we got to last off-season. I'll start to use berberine as well, pretty much every day.
Liam, what do you think about chromium?
Chromium? Yeah, chromium's good for pretty much the exact same thing as berberine, except it's not an antimicrobial. But for insulin sensitivity, yeah, it's great. I've used it in diabetic clients.
And do you use it in like a one dose, or do you use it like pre-meal sort of strategy?
Depends on the person. I actually found working with an applied kinesiologist, like this will sound woo-woo, but you can get it sort of muscle tested and how many dosages you can have per day and stuff. And a lot of clients that have been diabetic and had like restless legs and a few blood sugar issues and stuff like that, I found, yes, around meals seems to be the best. But yeah, before food.
And would you have a milligram sort of
50 to 75?
pre-meal?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. Just to go back to refeeds, yeah, I'm sort of on a similar I'm similar to Chris in the fact that like even with your prep at the moment, I base it off how long it takes to return back to baseline body weight. I think that's super important if you're in a fat loss phase. If your refeeds are taking you over a week to come back to, where you were pre refeed, then it's probably going to be too big. But I think the sweet spot is like 3 days, maybe 4 days. If you're kind of returning back to where you were, it's probably perfect. And then I'll just test and use the data. So like I will try to push it up as high as possible. And then maybe once you get it to that point where you see that it is taking a little bit longer to return, then you kind of can just adjust it from there. But it is a lot of trial and error because everyone is different. So like if I have a client in a fat loss phase, my first refeed might be a little conservative, and then I would just look at what happens and then go from there. And generally I like to do the 2 days unless there's other factors playing into it, but generally 2 days is enough, I think, in most cases.
Yeah, I think also just another point there as well. It's probably a good idea. Look, you can structure refeeds a number of different ways. Obviously in the case of say free meals, for example, if you're working around a social event, but if someone does take things very seriously, I much prefer to keep the food selection relatively the same. So you're going to be adding in things that are going to, digest very well for you. So if you're completely changing your diet every time you refeed, for example, as long as you're not going silly, I've had some clients who are like, oh yeah, I ate like 200 grams of oats and now my stomach's fucked. So like you need to be very mindful of those sorts of things and also what agrees with you in terms of digestibility for those carbohydrates that are coming in. So, even, you might be able to get away with the addition of some liquid carbohydrates or, things that are going to digest very well, are rice cakes, rice-based cereals, rice, cream of rice, all those things are going to be very easy ways to reach that additional amount of carbohydrates without putting so much stress on your GI.
Sick, sick. How many exercises per session to manage long-term fatigue when training to failure every set? Chris, go for it, man.
Exercises. So yeah, I mean, it really depends on the way you're structuring your program, I suppose, right? Like if you've got a push-pull leg set up, if you've got an upper-lower, if you've got a bro split or something like that. Because if you are only training a body part one time per week, you still have to get in a certain amount of volume through that session. So look, I think most exercises, and again, how many days you're training per week, it's really dependent on that. So like if you're training 6 days a week, you're probably only going to be doing maybe 5 or 6 exercises a day. If you're training 5 days a week, you might be doing 7 to 8. Probably the similar sort of thing if you're doing, lower, but the volume for each individual working set might be a little bit lower on like a push pull leg setup versus like an upper lower, just to get the requirement amount of volume in. So look, I'm much more preferential to sort of mainly 2 working sets, I guess, on most, heavier compound sort of movements, where you are sort of really trying to drive that, focus on mechanical tension. But then on, maybe like your accessory work, like a pec fly, for example, there might be utility to doing a little bit of extra volume. But if you're splitting that volume up and you're taking them all to failure, like intra-session, like in terms of actual ranges, I think it's not necessarily a question of exercises. It's a question of how many working sets per body part for that day are going to be effective, right? Because if you're doing 20 sets of chest in a single day, how many of those are actually going to be effective, right? Probably half of that. So I think that probably that range probably lies somewhere between maybe 6 to 10, maybe 12, if you've got like a bigger body part where, you're training multiple areas of it, like the back. But say something like your chest, for example, it might only be 6 to 10 working sets max that you might even be able to get in that one session. And again, obviously, the closer that you're training to failure, especially on those bigger compounds, the more fatigue that you're going to generate. So you probably have to be on the lower end of that scale. It might only be 6 working sets if you're going to be training that muscle group twice a week.
Liam?
Man, Chris, you absolutely nailed that.
Yeah, I think you nailed that, bro.
I was just like, yeah, like, what am I going to add to that? I mean, I've got my own methods, because I used to have that issue with volume and fatigue and stuff and not knowing certain rep ranges. I mean, I do a 3 times full body day split. And so I've got a day of recovery in between. And I actually do 2 working sets per muscle group. It's about 6 to 7 exercises. And I found that that's actually the sweet spot for, especially what Chris mentioned with mechanical tension and then as less CNS fatigue as possible. But if you do have those heavy compound movements, I'll say rule of thumb, like, I mean, if I'm doing back squats, I find if I do them at the start of the session, everything else suffers. If I do them at the end, I seem to be a lot better.
Yeah. I think 1 to 2 is like probably the sweet spot for that style of training. But I think, like, to your point, Liam, I think people grossly underestimate how low
They're
need
training
volume.
as well.
You got to
Yeah.
need a ton of volume, especially if you're training in this sort of manner.
With the intensity as well, he says he's going to failure. So
Yeah,
it's
but
like,
you
bro,
look
you
at
only
it.
need 1 set.
Yeah.
Like,
And the amount of footage I've looked at over the years where it's like, oh yeah, like because I want to see actually what that person's perception of failure is, and I look at it and I'm like, man, there's at least another 2 or 3 reps there. So you could be shooting yourself in the foot by not training with enough volume because your intensity is not where it needs to be. So if you aren't actually training to failure, there may be benefit to adding some additional working sets there. But if you literally are training to failure, then yeah, you probably want to be on the lower end of that scale.
Great, great. I think that's the biggest problem. People think they are training to failure, but they're actually not. So that's when more sets are actually needed.
you've got videos on the page of you guys hack squatting a failure I've seen. So just send them that.
Good foods to hit daily potassium targets.
Avocado,
Maybe Liam,
bananas.
yeah, you just might be.
Yeah. Potassium is an interesting one, because I believe the recommendation is like 4.4 grams daily, which is, yeah, 4,400 milligrams. It's a shit ton. Avocados are really good. Bananas are good. Grass-fed red meat's really good. Um, Look, I always go back to electrolyte powders just because it's so cheap. Like it's just so easy to get potassium in a supplemental form. So yeah, I'd give those 4.
Do you think electrolyte supplementation is like a good thing for most people?
Yeah, yeah. I see a lot of people just not prioritizing drinking water.
Yeah, and on panels, do you see like what do you see in the electrolyte like sodium, like all these
Yeah.
numbers?
Well, funnily enough, you see potassium lower than sodium majority of the time. Because sodium, there's a lot of sodium in processed foods, or a lot of people add salt to their diet. So yeah, I usually see sodium higher.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. Obviously, for me, working with a lot of like bodybuilders and stuff as well, which is important to have electrolyte stability, with peak weeks and coming into things like that. I tend to gravitate towards things like potato, sweet potato, spinach, banana, coconut water is another great source of potassium as well. So, and then also you have additions from like dried fruit as well. So like dried prunes, dried apricots, they can also be fantastic options to add in and just buff the potassium a little bit there as well. Actually, I also will use like there's a couple of like ones that probably people wouldn't really know about, like things like tomato, even like tomato pastes and things like that as well, are also very, very high in potassium as well for a lower sort of calorie amount. So they're probably the main heavy hitters that I use outside of formulas, just in terms of like actual food.
this is something like we've covered a little bit, me and you, Chris, with a lot of competitors is just getting that sodium potassium balance right, because it is something that you see, and it does actually change the look in a lot of
Yeah, for sure.
like even with Troy.
Yeah. Man,
Um,
that's a great example because like left him to his own device, not left him to his own devices last prep, but the prior prep to that, I was obviously meal planning for him, right? So I was trying to keep sodium potassium more in that balance. So for him, it was about a 1-to-1 for most of the time. So about 4,000 milligrams of sodium, 4,500-ish milligrams of potassium. And then obviously last prep, when we were coming into sort of peak week, I was just sort of leaving him. I was letting him sort of track his macros, right? Because we've been working together for quite a long time, and he started getting like all this additional water retention, fluid retention. So immediately I was like, okay, send me through your diet, send me through the amount of salt that you're adding, everything, and then I punched all the numbers in, and he was almost doing like 2 or 3 times the amount of sodium to potassium that he was doing in terms of his food selection. So immediately, as soon as I took over his diet again and sort of fixed that ratio, the balance of intracellular extracellular fluid looks so much better, and any edema that he sort of had really washed off, sort of from his face and ankles and stuff. So it really can manipulate the fluid balance. And look, your body does have ways of like correcting these balances, and it's like a checks and balance sort of thing, but you do want to have stability of your electrolytes. So it's like not like you need to cut potassium and load sodium and do all these different things that people normally do, or the old school sort of methods of peaking bodybuilders, but you need to have stability, and you sort of just need to know where those ratios are, because sometimes if you're going through like a peak week, for example, and people will change their food selections entirely, they can see your sodium go really, really high and potassium drop off, because now I've just started eating, I don't know, chicken and rice, right? Like unless you're actually adding in things like potato, dried fruits, maybe little bits of spinach, potato, all those things. Like I said, you really can see that electrolyte ratio change. So it's more or less, it's really important to try and keep that balance, especially when you're trying to peak a physique.
yeah, cool. Have you got time for two more, Liam?
Oh yeah. I wanted to actually elaborate on that one.
Oh, go,
So,
yeah, go for it,
well,
bro.
I actually, just me generally, I had a few curious questions for Chris because there's a lot of things I didn't know about there. So maybe the audience would have the same questions. But what's like, I guess, with that peak week and when those balances are out of whack, what's the general turnover? How long does it take?
Yeah, so look, it's pretty quick to be honest. Like fluid balance can regulate itself very, very fast. Probably within like a day or two. So like you probably see this, right? Like if you probably the easiest way to explain it would be like if you take someone's water from say 4 liters to 7 liters, right? Immediately they start excreting very, very quickly, right? And they start sort of that diuretic diuresis sort of effect. within sort of like a few days, they might be urinating, but not as frequently as what they were. So it's actually a pretty short time frame that you can see stability of electrolytes come about. But unfortunately, when you're peaking an athlete, that can be the time that like it can only take a couple of days and things are completely out of whack for a physique to really start to go downhill.
Gotcha. Because I noticed you mentioned like a lot of like dried fruits and all that stuff as well. Like, do you take into consideration obviously the sugar content because you're tracking their macros and stuff? Does that come into play with the water retention or?
Yeah, so look, more or less, it's coming down to, I guess, their total carbohydrate content rather than necessarily the sugars, because look, the metabolic byproduct is still essentially going to be the same.
Mm.
Obviously, fructose is a little bit different to glucose, but some amount of fructose is needed to aid in absorption of glucose as well. So I tend to still just do a little bit of a balance there of having some fructose in while they're loading. So it's still factored into their total carbohydrate total though. So
Yeah.
it's still a majority is still coming from, essentially glucose rather than fructose. You never want to really load someone with uh, purely just fruit, right? Because it's going to fill sort of liver glycogen before it'll fill skeletal muscle glycogen. So you want to have that ratio sort of a little bit of fruit and a lot of glucose as opposed to a lot of fructose and a lot of and not much glucose, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's mad.
Paul asks, should you train a muscle once per week or do half the volume and train it twice per week for maximum muscle growth?
I would argue train it 3 times per week for
Oh,
maximum muscle growth. I believe lower volume, higher frequency with the right intensity and recovery is key.
yeah. I'm kind of like,
Yeah, I think my opinion probably differs a little bit, simply because I think it comes down to the individual's intra-session recovery capacity. So you've got some guys who can do a lot of volume or even intensity in a single session, and they can, again, their performance doesn't get worse as the session goes on. They can maintain performance on pretty much every lift. I think what's more important is that your frequency allows you to have sustainable progression throughout your mesocycle of training. So if that means training, a muscle once a week versus twice a week versus 3 times a week, you have to sort of find that sweet spot, I guess, for yourself. Because I've got a lot of clients who have made just as much progress training on a once a week frequency versus training at a twice a week frequency. Um, I think I generally will flip between maybe once a week and twice a week. I think is probably the sweet spot for a lot of people who are trying to bring up maybe certain body parts as well. And then obviously those stronger muscle groups, I tend to turn the dial back down a little bit, and they might only be training them sort of once a week. But I generally will use frequency as like a little bit of a tool to drive maybe a little bit of additional progress on those muscle groups that we're sort of trying to bring up. But even in the research, to be honest, like there's not that much of a benefit to going necessarily higher frequencies. I think that provided that you've got a frequency in play that allows sustainable progression and you're able to consistently do, and you're training with enough volume inside each set and also inside each mesocycle, I don't really think it matters all that much, to be honest, from what I've seen in practice as well.
yeah, I feel like I haven't seen like much difference from any sort of frequency settings. Like, I think if I'm trying to, yeah, like you said, improve a specific muscle group, then it needs to have more volume, and then to have more volume, it's going to likely need to be split across more days. I think to your point, Liam, with the style that you train, because it is quite low volume, there might be benefits there just to simply like spread everything across like a 3 days.
It depends on the person, right?
Yeah,
Depends,
depends on the
you've got those people that, are obsessive and want to train 6 days a
yeah,
week. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Then
Do
you
you
have to come up with a split for them.
Chris, what do you put that down to? Like the person, because I find like I am the person that can train a lot of volume on one body part in one day and not lose performance. Do you think that's a muscle fiber makeup, or do you think that's something else? Or
Yeah, I've actually tried to ponder that same question, and I honestly I haven't really been able to come to a conclusion. And like I said in the research, there's not that if you really look into it, there's not that much of an additional benefit to higher frequencies because I think, yeah, look, it's even if you were just say training 8 to 10 sets of a single muscle group on one day. Maybe you just all train chest, but then you're still doing that every 7 days, but progressing on each exercise. You're still inevitably making progress. So I haven't seen that much extra benefit from then taking that person and then splitting that up over sort of 3 sessions. It still sort of equals out to be about the same. What I have seen in practice a lot is people increase their frequency too much and they start to pick up a lot of these little, niggles, wears and tears and stuff from the frequency, which then inhibits their long-term progression. So to answer your question, though, I'm not exactly sure. It could be muscle fiber makeup. It could be predisposition to injury. It could be, I guess, what's in play in terms of their drug stack, I guess, whether they're enhanced or whether they're natural. Look, there could be a benefit to naturals potentially training at a high frequency versus enhanced guys, just from that, elevation in muscle protein synthesis response. But aside from that, I'm not too sure.
Yeah, because look, obviously, like, you hear mostly like 2 or more per week, but then when you actually dive into the research, and I think Greg Knuckles did a fucking huge
Yeah, for
and
their review. Yeah.
he analyzed the data like a lot deeper, and it wasn't like, really, it was not that much
It's
of a
not as
benefit.
cut and dry as what people make it seem.
Yeah, I just think, look, I think they all work really well, and it's just
Mm.
how you set up the program rather than like, you know what I mean? If there's
Yeah.
too much volume, there's too much volume, or if there's not enough volume, then there's not enough volume, or if there's no marker for progress, then your program is shit. It's not like the frequency that really determines whether the program is going to be good or bad. It's however all the other variables are set up, and if they're
Yeah.
set up well, all of these things can work, man. All
Yeah.
of them can work really well, and we've seen it in practice. We've seen, you know, really good natural and enhanced bodybuilders both get results from 1, 3, 4, 5 days of frequency, like, and anything in between. So we know that it does work. And I think a lot of it just comes down to personal preference a lot of the time. And the thing that you enjoy, you're going to probably want to train harder and progress faster in.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think there's just not that much.
You really hit the nail on the head because I think elite naturals are probably the primary case study that I like to use as an example because you've got top level professional natural bodybuilders who train once a week, who train twice a week, who train 3 times a week in terms of like the frequency of muscle groups and on a whole bunch of different types of splits as well, and also volumes.
Hmm.
Um, be it relatively lower volume or higher volume, like you said, they're a great cohort of people to look at because they're already at the upper echelon of the sport and they all end up sort of at the same spot. You know what I mean? So it's like if you were looking at frequency as a whole and you're already looking at the genetic elite, you should see, okay, the guys who are training 2 or 3 times a week should be at the absolute top. But the reality is, there's so many different styles of training that essentially all work.
Yeah. Anything to add to that, Liam?
I got a lot to add on to it to be
Yeah.
devil's advocate. But like, do we think it like that example that you mentioned, Chris, with like the top professionals? You think purely it comes down to genetics? Because we know like a Dorian Yates will do like a 4 day split, like a Mike Mensa will just do, a high frequency 1 set to complete failure. But then you got like a Phil Heath genetic god who will actually lift lighter weights and high reps. Like, yeah, it's hard to say with those ones, but I think what you mentioned before about people when they start to go high frequency, because I see this a lot with my clients, it's really that once they understand they're on the right program and they're not doing a bunch of junk volume and they actually know that they can recover in between, I feel like that's the key for people. Like, honestly, it becomes more of a fact of like people just need to pay attention to their recovery and their performance more than how many days and splits they're doing themselves. Like, as long as they're still progressing, they're still progressing. And
Yeah,
as you
sure.
mentioned, Andy, if they're enjoying it, they're enjoying it. So they're getting results.
Yeah,
And it's
so
a
that's the
win-win for
reason I
everyone.
didn't say like Dorian Yates or any of the enhanced guys. So I only
Yeah,
reference the elite natural guys.
gotcha.
So, your Doug Millers,
But
your
still,
Brian
genetics can play a
Pickers.
part into those guys.
Yeah, but
Like
also they're already
Doug
all
Miller is.
genetically gifted. You know what I mean? They're all at the top
Yeah.
echelon. There's no drugs involved. So at the top echelon of natural bodybuilding, even if you look across the scope of the British guys and the guys from Germany who are at the top level, they're already all on pretty much a level playing field because they're all extremely genetic elite. And they all train on a number of different setups. So the reason I didn't say enhanced guys was down to the fact that you can get results in spite of what you're doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, but definitely agree with all those points you said as well, for sure.
Practically, with clients and even with myself, I just rotate through them, honestly.
Yeah, me too. I'm the same.
3 month block, what maybe you're doing a 1 frequency, 3 month block, maybe doing 2 frequency. And I just kind of rotate it like that, because then at least you're getting the best of every world, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Creates a bit of variety in the programming too, rather
yeah.
than just boom, 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 the same fucking thing day after day after day after day, you know?
Yeah.
And I say that and I haven't changed my training program in like 12 months.
But see, like for advanced lifters and experienced lifters, like we love doing that. We
Yeah,
love
the
not
same
changing
thing.
our program and seeing like 12 weeks in a row, we're still progressing. This is so good. My overhead press has only gone up 5 kilos, but it's just so rewarding.
I think people who are newer to training, or people who are not as serious about it, they need that dopamine hit of like
They
that.
need something to change, otherwise it feels like they're just sort of like they just get bored and they won't continue to train, you know?
Becomes less fun for them. Last one. Let's take one more. Sandy says 90-second rest versus 2-minute rest for compound movements. What's better for hypertrophy and managing fatigue? Chris, will take you first.
Yeah, so did you say as in 90-second versus 2-minute rest for compounds?
Yeah.
Yeah, so look, I actually think you can probably extend that that rest period out. I don't think anyone should be doing 90 seconds on a compound. If you are, the intensity is nowhere near high enough. I think on those bigger compounds, the things that carry a lot of systemic fatigue, so like a heavy squat or a heavy deadlift, like you should be resting probably anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes almost if you're training at maximal intensity for those lifts. So I think that anyone training anything, I would say 2 minutes might be an adequate rest period for like an accessory movement, like a lateral raise or a bicep curl, you know, anywhere from a minute 30 to 2 minutes. But for like a compound, like you probably want to be extending those rest periods out longer because that's the biggest bang for your buck. And again, it's going to depend on how long I guess it takes for you to get back to baseline performance again. So for someone, I guess that's doing like a heavy deadlift, like if you step up to the bar, if you I just look at it like if you feel like you need an extra 30 seconds, just take it. Um, that's pretty much my thoughts is 2 minutes is even too short.
Liam?
She mentioned that she's specifically going for hypertrophy, yeah?
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, I would exactly agree with what Chris mentioned because the hypertrophy response that she wants, it's going to come from the performance. And if she hasn't rested adequately in the 90 seconds to 2 minutes, then she's not going to hit the rep range or get the performance that she needs to actually hit the hypertrophy that she wants.
Yeah. See, I think I have a different opinion to you guys. Like, I think as long as the rest time is consistent and you're seeing progress, then
Yeah, that's a good counter
Like,
argument.
yeah, I have programs that are more intensity based, which are going to be like longer rests, more recovered sets. So you're going into the next set much more recovered. And then I sometimes run programs that are under recovered and you're going into the next set. So if you, I don't know, I'm just pulling programs out of nowhere. But if you're looking at like 10x10 programs, 8x8 programs, any of these like voluminous programs or accumulation style programs, I don't see them as potentially being less, you're going to get less hypertrophy from that program. Yes, you're going to be not lifting as much weight because you're not going to be able to handle as much weight just due to the amount of volume you're doing. But I don't think the weight is the factor. I think as long as you're still taking that muscle to where it needs to go each of those sets and you're still seeing progress on a weekly basis, then you're still going to achieve hypertrophy. So personally, I kind of have like a high, like not a hybrid, but like an altered version of sort of like the Poliquin sort of, intensity accumulation blocks. I like to use that sort of style of programming and periodization. And again, it creates a little bit more like for the general person, I think it just creates a little bit more interest and it's a little bit more fun than just doing the same mundane sort of like 3-minute rest, 3-minute rest, 3-minute rest. And I don't think that it really inhibits results in any way.
Yeah, I think there's a relationship between the amount of working sets you're doing there, though. So, like, for example, if you're doing 4 working sets, yeah, you could probably do a shorter rest period. But if you're doing, say, 2 working sets, like I'm preferential towards,
Yeah,
you need
definitely.
longer time frame because the intensity that you're handling
100%.
is much
You
higher.
need more sets if you're going to
Yeah,
if you're going to do that.
more sets, you need less recovery time. Less sets, more recovery time.
Yeah, and the thing that kind of got me thinking about that was because I always used to think, you know, more similar to both of you guys, but then when I dived into the drop set research, and the rest pause research, it really came up with an argument for shorter rests for me as well. Like I got from that research, like that research showed that those rest pause sets, you're only having a 10-second rest in there, and you're getting a very similar hypertrophy response in that second and third rest pause.
That research though, is that on compounds or is that on accessories?
I don't know, but it just shined a light, even if you're doing, say, a drop set or whatever, it just shined a light on me like that. It's the rest, while it can be important, it's how far you're taking the set intensity wise and a measure of progress. I think that like it's those three things, right? And yeah, from those two sort of bits of research, I kind of like lost a little bit of ground for me on like the rest breaks. I think as long as you're progressing and you're keeping it consistent, if you're doing a 30-second rest one day or a 90-second rest one day, and then the next day next week you're doing a 3-minute rest, well then obviously you're going to be able to lift more the second week. So it's not really progress, right? Because you're not keeping the variables consistent. But I think, yeah, generally like being recovered is going to allow you to be stronger, of course, and create maybe more tension. But yeah, it's a bit of a funny one. Anything to add to that, guys?
You
It's
got
all
anything?
ticking in. It's all
Yeah.
ticking in my mind. I've got a few things that like, I mean, the biggest thing I look for is mechanical tension and motor unit recruitment. They're the two things I drive for muscle growth. And I try and go as far away from any form of excessive sets and junk volume as I can. Not to say that they don't work. But you know, for a lot of my guys, I try and keep fatigue as less as possible and try and get maximum results just in and out of the gym.
Yep.
But again, if someone finds that they recover from before working sets and they're recovering every single week and they're seeing results, then who am I to argue? You know what I mean? So, yeah,
Yeah. Look, yeah, that
I'm,
style
I'm
definitely
open-minded with
evolves.
all of it because
Yeah.
you can fuck yourself with reading so much
Give me the
research, and
kind of jump volume though.
this is what makes us coaches like so good as individuals because we come up with our own conclusion and have our own programming, but we can always go back and forth.
Yeah.
What do you find as junk volume?
Junk volume. So if you've hit 2 working sets of failure and then anything over that, I believe on one muscle group in the same session, even if it's from a different angle, you're not going to recruit as many motor units. You may still hit mechanical tension, but the muscle growth actual perspective, your body's not driving it. And you could be just doing excessive fatigue when you think you're potentially getting results.
Would you agree with that, Chris?
I think that for me, that's probably like you mean 2 working sets per body part per session.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think for me, it's probably closer to that 6 to 10 range per session. Because like I said before, if that were
I
true,
have very different clients though.
yeah, yeah. If that were
You've
true,
got clients that are looking to like literally optimize hypertrophy to the freaking max, and I think your clients are more like, I want to get the best bang for buck from like the shortest amount of
yeah,
time.
yeah, yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
that's
Yeah,
true.
yeah, yeah,
My guys
yeah.
are busy guys. They don't want to
Yeah,
be in the gym.
Yeah, yeah.
that's what I'm
So
They
yeah,
want to
saying.
be, yeah, they
definitely
want to be
again,
in
if the
and out.
frequency
Yeah.
is higher as well, like you probably have to split the volume
Yeah.
up that way to get that
Mine
optimal
are
amount.
all on 3 times full body, by the way.
Yeah, well, that's
Yeah,
what I
like,
mean, right?
yeah,
Like you're
that's
going
why I
to have to
shifted them
split it
that
up
way.
that
Yeah.
way, versus someone who's training maybe 5 or 6 days a week.
Mm.
You can get a little bit more intra-session volume in there, and as long as when one Monday comes around to the next Monday, as long as you're still able to progress on all of your movements, even within those sort of set brackets that we spoke about, like that's still increasing mechanical tension. So I guess, yeah, from your example, like, or for me personally, like obviously most of my guys are all competitive bodybuilders, physique, bikini athletes, etc. So yeah, for those guys, it's like how can we maximize muscle growth to the absolute nth degree? But yeah, I think anything more than that, but yeah, like on Andy's point there actually as well. I guess with the way that you tend to structure that, like we said before with splits, I think it's all relative as well. So if you've started a block where you are maybe doing 4 working sets on that at maybe even just like a sub-maximal load, because I don't think personally that if it's not submaximal and you're training with some element of reps in reserve, you'll be able to see that sustainable progression for any length of time. So I think that, like I said before, it's still the argument of uh, intent, like the higher amount of intensity requires that higher set break or rest period in between, versus obviously the more volume that you're doing has to be a little bit more submaximal to sort of make up the same amount of ground in terms of tension. So as long as I guess you're not training too close within that proximity to failure on that compound, because I think even if you look at a lot of the research on like the drop sets and stuff, a majority of it isn't on compound movements, right? Like it's on a bicep curl, or it's on a movement that's like a single joint isolation exercise, which, yeah, like you're not going to accumulate much fatigue on that. But the fatigue on doing like 4 sets of squats at maybe 80%, or maybe like a 1 or 2 RIR, like that's pretty massive compared to, training to failure 4 sets on a bicep curl.
Yeah.
And that's why, yeah, that's why I'd argue, like, in terms of fatigue, like, you do those 2 working sets of like 4 reps on a back squat and you'd rest your 3 to 5 minutes in between. It's like, how much more are you getting out after that point?
But
Yeah.
look, it comes back around also to like, are most clients actually training to failure?
No, 100%. Yeah, for
Then,
sure.
and what, like we spoke about on the other question, then there's an argument for, should we add more sets then? If we know
Yeah,
that
my less advanced clients that are maybe just like getting into the gym, or maybe they have been training for like a little while, I always use more working sets for that
yeah.
exact reason, that I already account for the fact I know that they're not going to be training hard enough. For guys that I know that like fucking absolutely take it to the house, like say like an Az or a Jake or one of those guys who I know I'm worried about them training too hard,
Mhm.
in those instances, I'll be very careful with the amount of volume that I'm prescribing per movement, because I know if they did 4 sets, the load they would have to use to sustain that for so long would absolutely bury them. They would not be able to maintain that and then progress on it in future weeks. So for a lot of those guys, like it's closer to like Liam's ranges, they're around that 2 working sets for most compounds. But if I've got someone else who's newer to the gym, I'll probably give them 4 sets for an exercise at like a specific. I might not even put an RIR because I just expect they're going to be at a 1 to 2. And that allows for, skill acquisition over the next few weeks, to that way, because again, they might only do 2 working sets, but they could get more out of more because they're not training hard enough.
Yeah. The way I always used to, I still do, but when I was working with clients in person in the gym more so, the way I could tell like what style of training I should give them and what they'll lend more to, um, is I'd say, okay, say we're doing an RDL or a squat or whatever it is. Say, I want you to do this set so you can't do anymore. All right. So I'll put them under a certain weight. So you go to failure,
Good old AMRAP.
and then I'll give them, say, 3, 4 minutes, and I'll say, do it again. If they can get the same amount of reps, then you know that they probably didn't push themselves to that degree. Because if you're going to go to failure on a set, it's probably likely that you're not going to be able to repeat that effort a second time in with a short period of time. So then you can kind of get a gauge on how intense a set is and how intense they're sort of like pushing a set.
Yeah. Plus, you can see it. Like they'll
Yeah.
literally rack the bar, and there's literally no slowing at all of the repetition, and you're like, man, what are you doing?
All right, we might wrap it up there. Liam, what is your Instagram if people want to find you? I'll put it in the link in the description. I'll put a link to it in the description as well, but maybe just tell everyone where to find you if they want to inquire, work with you, get their bloods done, do all that stuff.
Yeah, it's just Coach Liam C. Murphy.
Awesome, awesome. I'll tag it in the bottom of this YouTube description. Chris, I always forget yours. What's yours?
Coach_Chris Black. I forgot my own. Coach_Chris Black.
Awesome, awesome. Ben, Liam, thank you so much for coming on, bro. We'll have to get you on again because there's just so much shit like I could talk about with you.
There's a lot
So
to still
it's so good
unpack.
seeing so many
Yeah.
different, I guess, viewpoints of coaches come together in terms of like people being able to get like some practical takeaways from things. I think it's like really helpful to actually have conflicting views on things, because you see a lot of podcasts, right? It's just like everyone's just parroting the same shit or
Just
agree.
agreeing. Yeah.
So it's good
No,
to
no
have
one's
some
afraid to
slightly
have different
yeah,
points. Yeah.
yeah. You can have different points and all still have a cordial discussion about it. It's great.
And it's like I said before, it all is going to get you great results. You're talking
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? Is that you follow any of those three things we said, or whatever it is, you're going to get good results.
like you're splitting hairs, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
With all this stuff. It's just like, fuck, just set your shit up properly and you'll be fine. So if you guys are after coaching, personal training, you want to transform your body, go to our website, www.strengthlabmelbourne.com.au. You can make an inquiry there. And we'll probably be back in the next couple of weeks, Chris, with another one.
Yeah, we'll see how I'm feeling at that point, but I should be. Just
Yeah,
don't ask me anything too difficult.
I think maybe next episode we do a dedicated Chris's prep episode.
Mhm.
That might be good. So
How many weeks out are we now?
9.9.5 maybe.
Yeah, I think it's actually 10. No, yeah, about 9.5 from IFBB Queensland titles.
Face is looking a lot leaner, bro.
Yeah, I'm feeling lean.
All right, we'll end it there. Thanks a lot, Liam. Appreciate it, brother.
No worries.